Welcome to the Pre to Post Transplant Podcast, a podcast that brings personal stories from transplant survivors, their families, friends, and loved ones. This is where you will hear challenges and triumphs of everyone involved in this journey. Our guests will offer wisdom, advice, and inspiration on everything you want to know about transplant. My name is Jenny McFarland. I am a transplant survivor, and this is a podcast I wish I had before and immediately following my transplant. Thank you for listening. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pre to Post Transplant Podcast, where you get to tell your side of the story. This is Jenny McFarland, your host, and I am very excited for today's episode. A couple of things I want to mention first, though, and I don't want to make it too long, but I do want to mention that last week I made a video talking about the podcast and about the Pre to Post Transplant Foundation, and I put it on the podcast Facebook page. And in the video, I mentioned about the transplant games, and the transplant games are in Birmingham, Alabama this year. And I was there in 2022 along with the Pre to Post Transplant Foundation. We had a booth, and I got to meet so many people, and I got to record people right there at the games, and I put them all into an episode. So if you haven't heard that episode yet, go back into 2022 and you'll be able to hear them. I made this video asking for people to help and participate in the Transplant Foundation's $5 Friday fundraiser. We were asking people to donate $5 to help us get to the transplant games, because if you've ever been to the transplant games, you know how expensive it is, and it's even more expensive to get a booth. If the foundation doesn't go to the transplant games, then the podcast can't go. So it's kind of a joint effort. And I don't really like to fundraise on the podcast platform, because I want the podcast to be about, the podcast only. But I felt like it might be appropriate this time, since I will be going to the transplant games again with the foundation. So anyway, I just wanted to say a quick thank you to everybody who supported me and supported the podcast and supported the foundation by going on and donating the $5, and some donated more. And we haven't quite reached our goal yet, but we're working on it. And I appreciate all of you so much. So thank you very much for donating. And if you are going to the transplant games this year, and I will be talking about this more as time goes along, but if you're going to the transplant games, please stop by the booth and find me and say, "Hey, Jenny, I listened to your podcast and I wanted to come meet you," because I love meeting new transplant people or people in our community. And I love hearing that people are listening to my podcast. So if you're there, make sure that you find me and come say hello. And I'm going to have the recording equipment out again, so you can record a message and be on the show, just like last time. So anyway, I just wanted to say thank you for supporting me, and I appreciate you all so much. So let's go ahead and jump into this episode. I got to talk to Pamela, who came on to talk about her journey of her heart transplants. I said, and transplants, that's plural. She's had 2 of them, and I'm going to let her tell you the story. It's a great story. It's inspirational, and it was really nice to hear about the things that she went through. Some of the things that we talked about I could relate to, even though I had a lung transplant, she had a heart transplant. So also, there was another special guest. It wasn't just Pamela. She has the cutest, fluffiest little puppy called Meatball. And Meatball really, really wanted to be on the podcast too. So if you hear Meatball in the background, or sometimes he chimes in, don't worry. He's just sharing his thoughts. So I try to take most of it out, but there are some times that Meatball was able to get a word in. So if you hear him, just know that he's so cute that you just have to let him. So anyway, with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump in and help me welcome my guest, Pamela Sherman. Hi, Pamela. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So let's start off by telling me when you had your transplant, where you had it, and why you needed one.
Okay, so I had my transplant in January 2023 from University of Chicago and wound up needing a second one later that year in November. My family has a gene that we've only realized kind of in the last decade or so that's been being passed down from the last few generations. And this gene causes all different forms of cardiomyopathy. It presents in different ways for all of us. And my sister wound up having a transplant when she was 35 in 2012. My dad died at 44 while on the transplant list
Oh.
in 1991. And my cousin also passed at 44 as well a couple of years ago. So, unfortunately, through all of these health issues that came by surprise, we've now realized that we have something and we've done a fair amount of genetic testing to confirm it.
And you said your sister had a transplant, and is she
Yes,
still alive?
she is still alive and she's doing amazing.
That's great. That's great.
Yes,
Okay, so I guess we'll call it cardiomyopathy is the main
yes,
reason why you had your transplant. And so
yes.
tell me a little bit about the first one that you had. What kind of symptoms were you having and how long were you on the list and that whole. Let's start with your first one.
Okay. So once we realized that I had this gene, I was very aggressive about following up with a cardiologist and being checked very often. And I started to have abnormalities and irregularities with my beats and heartbeats. So my issue was all what they call electrical. My sister had a totally different issue, which was about her heart muscle enlarging, and she had dilated cardiomyopathy, totally different than what I had. And so I was being monitored for all of the different issues I had with irregular beats. I wound up having a ablation. I had a pacemaker installed. I had a combination pacemaker ICD, that's a defibrillator, installed after my cousin died, just for additional safekeeping, and everything was kind of chugging along like that. I had my ICD for probably 5 years with no incident, and I was still really active, playing sports and just doing my thing. I was on a tennis team that I played with, and I would play 5, sometimes 7 days a week. And I was playing a tennis match, and my husband was there, my kids were there, lots of people were there viewing, and I got defibrillated in the middle of the match,
Oh,
which
wow.
I had never been defibrillated before. I didn't even know, I didn't really understand what was happening. I just was standing still at the time and felt like I got hit with a baseball bat. I don't know how else to explain it.
Yeah.
And I walked off the court and called my cardiologist because I was friendly with her. And I said, I think I got defibrillated, but I'm not even sure. And so
Yeah.
I told her what happened. And she's like, yes, you did. You need to resign the match and you need to leave and you need to come to the hospital.
Yeah.
So that was really the first like major incident that, things were not going in my favor. And after that, they changed a lot of my medication, put me on things that were much more involved than what I was on prior, and had a lot of really bad side effects that I was not enjoying. But I still just decided I was going to figure out how to be active and just get through all those things. And then a couple months later, playing a tennis match again, I was defibrillated again.
Oh, wow. Well, is there a
So
reason why? Like, is it because you were playing tennis? Like your heart rate was elevated? Maybe that's
no,
why
I
it
mean, I
happened?
was cleared to be playing. They wanted me to try to keep my heart rate at a certain level, and I had an Apple Watch, and I was watching it the entire time I played, which wasn't really as fun as before, but I had to monitor those things, and I did. It's just that I have this gene, and it makes my heart do funky things. And being defibrillated the second time was oddly totally different experience. I don't even remember being defibrillated, and I passed out at some point, but I don't even remember that either. I was just playing and just started seeing stars.
Oh,
It was
wow.
just like black. And my doctor told me afterwards that I actually got defibrillated 2 times because that's how long it took to like get my heart going again. And after those incidents, I was scared.
Yeah, I bet. I bet you were. Probably a
For
lot
sure.
scared to play tennis too. for sure.
Yes. And then, and I mean, and that happened. I started getting panic attacks and whatnot and all the time when I was playing and going behind the curtain of the court and just like taking deep breaths and trying to drink water. And it was all just becoming really stressful. So at the time I was at a different hospital than I'm at now. I had, a couple appointments to discuss what happens next. And because my sister had had her transplant and was doing so well, and I felt like that was going to be my path anyways, I actually asked, can I go on the list? I want to just be transplanted and I don't want to live with this level of fear anymore. It's too difficult.
Yeah,
And they said to me that they felt like on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most needed, that I was a 0 or a 1 in their
really.
assessment.
Wow.
So I was like, how am I a 0 or a 1 when I'm getting defibrillated and my heart rate's like in the like high 200s when this is all happening? And that hospital takes really only top tier. There's 6 levels right
Right.
now for how you get ranked, and they really only take top tier. And I recognize I wasn't. But I said, what's the plan? And they said, well, let's just gather more data and see. And I said, well, that sounds like you're saying, let's have me get defibrillated again and see how that goes, which I didn't want to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just decided it was a good time I got a second and a third opinion, which I never even thought to do before because I just had always been treated at the same hospital and it's a really good hospital. But I just thought, you know what, I'm going to just see if all the experts tend to agree. And I went to University of Chicago and I met with the cardiologist there. And he said, you have this gene. We know for a fact it's not going to get better. I don't know why we would just wait and see kind of how bad this could get. We think you should be transplanted. So I said, okay, let's do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to actually ask you about that, and how I mean, you were obviously familiar with transplant because of your sister.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I was going to ask if you knew that you were going to need a transplant because of this condition. Obviously, the answer was yes. So, um, you answered all my questions before I asked them, but I was going to ask you, how you felt about transplant, and and did you know about? So your sister was doing really well,
Yes.
which is a wonderful thing. But did you know about like other complications that people can have before deciding, hey, I'm going to get this transplant. I'm ready for it now.
Well, my sister was very, very sick leading up to transplant. She was on ECMO. I don't know if you're familiar with
Yeah,
ECMO, but that's life support.
yeah,
So she had no choice. And then she was on an LVAD for 7 or 8 months, and then she had her transplant. So in my mind, I kind of understanding I had a different like form of the condition than she did. I just was terrified of waiting to see what else
yeah,
could happen to me. There is a point where if you're too sick, you can't get a transplant.
right.
And I just had maybe such a positive and naive, I guess, vision of what getting a transplant is, because for my sister, it's just like
Yeah,
everything changed and improved and has stayed great for, many years.
yeah,
So maybe I was a little naive about it, but I felt like I had a ticking time bomb in my body and it just scared me all the time.
yeah.
It was just giving me a lot of anxiety and panic issues. And I just didn't see any advantage or reason to just sit and wait and see if it kills me.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of had the same thing when I did my transplant. I mean, I didn't know anybody who had a transplant before. I also didn't know all the things that could happen. I didn't until I
Yeah.
started this podcast and I started talking to people. I didn't realize all these other things. I thought my transplant was pretty standard and everybody did, as well as I did. And I didn't realize that there was all these different levels of issues or ways that you recover or
Yeah.
and so I think if I would have known about all of those things beforehand, I might have been a little bit more worried, I guess, because I wasn't
Yeah.
really worried before. A little bit, this I was worried, but I wasn't like I probably would have been terrified actually
Right.
if I would have
I
known.
agree. I
So
agree. But I just felt like, what's worse than this? This is scary. I
yeah,
don't. I just was scared all the time and having panic attacks constantly. And I'm like, this isn't, at the time I was 42. I'm like, this isn't gonna work for me for the rest of my life. I have, kids and a life, and this can't be the plan.
Yeah.
And then I joined a Facebook group, and then I started reading too many scary stories and bad outcomes from them. So then I had to get really careful about how much time I was spending in that group.
Right. Yeah. The same. Same. So Chicago said, yes, you're ready for transplants.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
what happened after that? Like, how long did it take before they actually put you on the list?
So they're really organized and buttoned up, which is something that I love. And they basically planned, I think it was 3 full days of all kinds of appointments for me.
Right.
There's a million different things that you have to do to qualify. And so I had 3 really long days of testing. You get a right heart cath, you get like every other part of your body looked at. You have to have a mammogram, and I mean, just everything. So I went
Yeah.
through all of that. And then like a week later, I emailed the coordinator and I was like, what are next steps? Like, when do I, find out? And she's like, oh, we didn't tell you you made it. I'm like, oh, okay, well, thanks. Um, and then they had me meet with a surgeon who was spearheading the Heart in a Box program. Are you
Oh,
familiar
yeah.
with Heart in a
I've heard
Box?
of the lungs. They had the lungs in the box too, but
They have lungs in a box.
yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Oh,
they were experimenting it with it when I was getting ready to be transplanted too. I don't think it was ready till
okay.
way after, but go ahead.
Got it. Well, they had me meet with the surgeon who was spearheading the program, and he was just so enthusiastic about, how great those hearts are and how much faster you can get a heart. And it would all be just, I really should opt in for it. Um, and I said, I'm going to go on a big vacation that I had planned with my family because I'm like well enough to do that. And when I get back, I'll go on the list. And he was like, you should go on the list right now. Like, you might get a heart next week. And they had ranked me as status 6. So I was like, I don't think it's going to be that fast.
Yeah.
Um, and I just wanted to have like a minute with my family. And, I didn't
Yeah.
know what the future held and when we'd have a chance again to go on a trip. So I went on the trip, and then I went on the list. And then I was on the list from, I think it was end of July, and just waiting. And I really don't feel like I did very well on the list. I was very stressed. I, had my phone glued to my side all the time. I answered every single call that came, which made my spam go insane. So I was just getting like all these calls all day long. It was kind of slowly driving me crazy.
Yeah.
And I'm someone that likes to keep my phone at bay and just like be with the people that I'm with. And you don't have that option. And especially as a mom, every day I was kind of planning, okay, if I get the call, like, well, who will drive so and so where, and how will this happen, and what. It was just, I think other people probably handled it better. And I was in a unique situation because I really was like functioning relatively fine day to day, health
Yeah.
wise. So it's just a lot to wrap my head around. And I met with my team and my therapist, and we all agreed that I was going to take a little break and go away with my family on a vacation. And that's something I didn't want to tell my Facebook group because I felt like they would go after me for it. But it's really hard
Probably
to
would.
explain what your frame of mind and just mental capacity is during that time. It's just so scary every day, all the time, wondering if you get the call, don't get the call, if something bad's going to happen to your health. Is it not? It's just a lot.
Yeah.
So I went off the list for like 3 weeks, and then I came back at the end of December. And then I got the call in January. I got the call on January 19th, which was a really special day for me because that was the anniversary of my dad's passing. And it was really late at night. It was like 11 o'clock at night. And I was, even though you're waiting for it, you're not ready.
Yeah.
And they said, can you be down at the hospital in an hour? I'm like, an hour? I live an hour away. And the woman on the phone said, honey, go get your shoes, get a toothbrush, and just get in the car.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I'll do that. And on the drive down there, like everybody I knew was sleeping. I called people, but like nobody picked up. And I just didn't get a chance to really like talk to anybody. And I found out later that the reason that they wanted me there so quickly was because the heart was completely mapped out and intended for somebody else. And for some reason, at the last minute, it didn't come together. So they had the OR prepped, the surgeons ready, the organs sitting there, and nobody to operate on.
Oh, wow.
So when I got there, it was like a movie. They like ran me upstairs, and when the elevator doors opened, there were like 20 people just standing there. And then we were literally running down the hallway.
Yeah.
It was kind of good that it happened that way because there just wasn't time to be worried.
Yeah. Well, and also it was good that they already knew that it was ready. Like the heart was good and it's good to go.
Yeah,
I've heard of so many like stories where they get the patient into the operating room on the table and then it turns out that the organ isn't viable.
I was
And
so worried
so,
about having a dry
yeah.
run. I agree.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So there were a lot of complications during the surgery. I guess there's, specs on what heart is going to be compatible for you. And mine was within the size range, but I guess it was on the higher end size wise. And most people with damaged hearts heading into transplant have an enlarged heart. And mine was not enlarged because I just had arrhythmia issues. So it was like a tight fit to get into my body.
Oh, yeah.
And it was preventing my heart from squeezing properly. So they left me open for a couple of days and then they put me on ECMO,
Oh, okay.
which is like life support. So I
Yeah.
was on that for, I think, 2 or 3 days. So by the time I woke up, I guess everything was like working okay, but it was not the ideal path for healing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So everything was just a little bit harder just coming off of ECMO and whatnot. And then I wound up getting damage to my vocal cords from surgery, which
Oh,
is not something I knew that you could get.
yeah.
But it really affects like your swallowing and obviously your ability to speak and all of that stuff. I had to have like complicated procedures done to try to like fix all of that. And then I was done.
Yeah. So how long did it take total? Like how long were you in the hospital afterwards?
I was in the hospital for, I think, a little over 2 weeks.
Okay. Okay.
But physically I was just depleted. Like I came home with a walker
Yeah.
and it was all just a lot more than I thought it was going to be. It would just took a really long time to be able to just like walk up the stairs and just do regular things. And um, I think I lost a lot of muscle mass. Like I couldn't even hold a cup properly. It was like too heavy.
Yeah.
And it was, yeah, so it was a lot, but I made it through all of that. And then I started cardiac rehab and I injured my ankles. And then I had to do physical therapy as well. And it was just a whole list of stuff. But I got to a point where I was like starting to feel really good, I think around like 6 or 7 months.
Yeah.
And everything was going great. And I planned my first vacation with some friends to go to Las Vegas. And I was just like really optimistic about being so close to a year out. And right before I left, they called me and they said, there's this blood test that they do called Heart Care. Have you heard of it?
I haven't, no.
It's this really sophisticated blood test, I guess, that they send to California, and it's able to detect a lot of times in advance like issues with your heart. So they called me and they're like, all your numbers from your heart care are elevated. And I was like, but I feel great.
Yeah.
And like, okay, we'll go on your trip and then, we'll do more blood work when we get back. And when I came back, my blood work wasn't good either. And then I started not feeling good. I had pneumonia and a couple other things I was in the hospital for. And I just kept getting admitted and then let out and admitted and let out like all through October, basically. And then they finally did a echocardiogram. And then I came in early November to just like go over what happens next. And I brought my husband with me, which I'm so glad that I did because I really didn't understand what the appointment was for.
Yeah.
And when I got there, they said, we looked at your echo, your ejection fraction is 18%. That's ejection fraction's like an important metric for heart health, and you want to be like over 50%.
Oh,
And I
wow.
was at like almost 70 after my transplant. So
Oh, wow.
it's way worse than it ever was, when I had my original heart. And they said, you have CAV. And I said, what's that? I've never heard of that before. It stands for cardiac allograft vasculopathy, I believe.
Okay.
And I guess like 50% of heart transplant patients wind up with this.
Oh,
And as I understand it, for pretty much everybody else, it is a like slow acting progressive thing that usually starts a couple of years out and can be managed with medications. And for a lot of people, just is not, a huge issue. But for me, for whatever reason, it was very early onset, very aggressive, and just couldn't be reversed. So they're like, this heart's not viable.
oh, wow.
I was like, what
And
do you mean it's not viable?
well, what would you, whenever they said that, like, what were you thinking? Like, were you, well, you were probably shocked, I'm sure, but like,
It
what
wasn't
was going through your
anywhere
mind?
on my list that the heart wasn't going to work out, because they always told me before and after transplant, sometimes you'll get mild rejection, like you should expect to be
Yeah.
hospitalized here and there, we need to like tweak things, and your body's going through a lot, and we'll know what to do. So I just kind of leaned into that because frankly it sounded good to me, not to be
Yeah.
chronically worried all the time. And I was just completely shocked
Yeah.
and really upset.
Yeah. I'm sure. So did they put you on the list right away or
So then, oh, and my son's bar mitzvah was supposed to be that weekend.
oh,
I was like, what do I do? What happens? And
yeah.
they're like, it's great news. You don't have antibodies, so we can just relist you. I was like,
Oh, that's great
relist
news.
me. Yeah. And then they said something like, and it's also really great that your scar is so fresh. It will be good for your surgery. I'm like, what? Just
They're trying to throw out as many positive things they
like
can, I
these,
guess.
yeah, these are really crappy pros.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what happened. And then they said come in tomorrow. They wanted to do a right heart catheter, and they said depending on that, you can go home, have your son's bar mitzvah, and we can like deal with this next week or not. And after I had the test, they're like, I hope you packed a bag because you can't leave.
Oh no.
So that's what I did. And then by the next day I was on the list.
Wow. And you missed the bar mitzvah.
Yeah, we had to cancel, we had to like cancel everything. When you're in shock and you just kind of like things you think are bizarre, or
Yeah.
just, so I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like as soon as the doctors left, I'm like, I need to call the photographer. Like, I don't know why I thought that. I just, everything was buzzing around in my head.
Yeah.
Um, and then it was just as shocking and difficult to tell my family and other people. People are like, what? How can this happen? Why is this happening? I just
Yeah.
like, I don't know.
Yeah. So you stayed in the hospital and you automatically went on the list when you went in?
I went in on Thursday for the testing, and then by the next day on Friday, I was listed. And this time I was listed as a status 2. So everything just felt so different to me, because I felt like for the first transplant, it was as much on my terms as it could be. My health issues were out of control, but I had sought the transplant and, picked the hospital, and could even decide like when I wanted to start being on the list. And this just felt more dire and scary and just a lot of shock.
Yeah. And how long did it take before you got the next transplant?
So they were telling me it's going to be really quick because you're so high on the list. They're like, probably just a couple of days. I was like, okay. And I got worse really quickly. All of a sudden, I started to feel terrible. I would stand up to go brush my teeth, and all the alarms would start going off because my heart rate would go to like 180 just from brushing my teeth.
Oh,
And
wow.
resting, it was like stuck in the 140s just all the time, even laying down. And I feel like that was probably my like darkest time,
Yeah.
where I was essentially on bed rest because my heart rate kept going up so high so quickly. So I just was laying in bed just thinking, how did this happen for, you know,
Yeah.
all day and all night for multiple days on end. And I like looked at the calendar and I said, okay, Thanksgiving is 2 weeks away. Just get yourself to Thanksgiving. And then if you're still waiting, figure out like something new to just, hold on to. And I got my heart on Thanksgiving.
You did? Oh,
Yeah,
I mean, that's kind of a cool thing, right?
it's really cool. I was happy
Yeah.
with it.
Wow. Okay. So, what, when you were in the hospital and it's Thanksgiving and they came to tell you today's the day, what were you thinking? Like, what was going through your head? Because it
Well,
was
it's
like,
not the
what,
same.
2 weeks?
Yeah, it was like 2 weeks. It's not the same fanfare and announcement that I had in my head.
Right.
It's not
Yeah.
like that at all. I was sleeping in the middle of the night and someone came in, said nothing to me, and just shut down all my IVs. And I was like, well, why would that happen? Like maybe something's happening. And I think I asked, like, what's going on? And they just laughed.
Oh my God. Okay. Maybe they weren't allowed to
And
tell you, I guess.
yeah, but I'm sure. But I kind of was like, okay, well, maybe that means something. And in the morning, this really stoic doctor came into my room and he was like, we have something that we believe is viable. We're doing further tests and we'll, just a bunch of jargon. And I was like, what does that mean? Is there a heart? And he's like, yes. I'm like, oh, I didn't really understand that. So that
Wow.
was fun. And then
Yeah.
I called my mom, and my mom wears hearing aids, and it was very early in the morning, so she didn't have them in yet. So I called her and I was like, Mom, there's a heart for me. And she didn't hear me correctly. So she's like, oh, you're all alone on Thanksgiving. No heart, no, no transplant. What a sad day. I'm like, no, Mom, I got it. It's happening. And she's like, oh, that's amazing. It was funny. It
Wow.
was funny.
Okay. So,
So
so they take you in. Did they have the same problems as before, like with the heart not fitting, or were
no,
you like all stretched out and the heart went in?
no, they told me that this time they were going to keep it on the lower end range of what would work for me so that that wouldn't even be an issue. And all the doctors and people that were part of the team that I know came in and said it's really good. I looked at it, I checked it. It's going to be awesome. And I didn't have my surgery till almost midnight, so we were just kind of like hanging out and I was just FaceTiming my family at Thanksgiving and
Yeah.
just kind of waiting.
And you couldn't eat Thanksgiving food
I
because you were
couldn't eat
waiting for
anything for the whole
surgery.
day.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
But the surgery itself went so much smoother. There was like no complications or issues. And everyone kept saying, you're just going to have a regular transplant this time. Like, sounds good.
Yeah.
So I did.
And you woke up and I mean, there was no ECMO, no staying open, none of that.
And no, I just couldn't believe how much easier it all felt. Like it was so much easier. I was, up and starting to do some walking, I think maybe 3 days later, which the last time just wouldn't even be close to possible. And I think it was on day 5, they sent me to the gym.
Oh, wow.
And I thought they were kidding. I'm like, what am I supposed to do here? They're like, sit
Yeah.
on a bike, go slow. So I did.
Wow.
And that was really cool. Um, And then I told my whole team that my son is starring in a play and I really want to see it. And I hope that I can get out so I can see it. And I told them the date and they started laughing. They're like, you can't get out of the hospital that early. I said, well, maybe, let's just see how I'm doing. And they ultimately let me out after only 8 days. And I got to go see my son's play.
Wow.
And it just felt like the beginning of like, maybe this is all going to be all right.
So, did they tell you why, or do you know why that the first transplant was so much harder than the second one? Because was it because of the heart not fitting in properly, so they had to leave you open and do the ECMO and all that? Yeah,
Yeah, that's why.
yeah. I know
That's
that
why.
ECMO really takes like so much out of people whenever they have to have it. And then
It's
you're
really
and then
intense.
you were asleep longer, you were laying, in the bed longer, so that's probably why too.
It's just really intense. I don't, it just took days for me to even feel like I was kind of like awake and fully present. I remember for almost a week, my phone was too heavy to hold. I just couldn't do anything. It
Yeah.
was weird.
Yeah.
But this time I felt much more like I had a big surgery, but now I'm okay and I'm starting the healing process. So that
Yeah.
was good.
That's great. So, it's been, let's see, about 5, 6 months now. How are you doing?
Yeah, it's been not even 5 months yet. And I mean, I think the hardest thing really is just um hard to turn my brain off and say, like, I already did this.
Yeah.
And it's complicated because, of course, I'm so appreciative and so lucky to be able to get an organ twice, and that's not lost on me. At the same time, it's complicated with transplant because it's still a tough path.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a unique illness in that way. And with transplant, you're like trying to process like gratitude and all of these feelings all at the same time. I never wanted to like sound ungrateful, but
Yeah.
I didn't want to do this 2 times. It was awful.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I understand. And I guess for me, if I were in your situation, I would always have that in the back of my head, and especially for the first 10 months,
Yeah,
wondering if, something's going to happen again since it happened
yeah,
before. But
yeah.
it sounds like it was a complication. It wasn't necessarily the genetic reason or like
No,
the health reason that you had before.
no, it
Yeah.
wasn't that. And CAV is really common. And I just somehow lucked out with it being as aggressive as it was.
Yeah.
And they said like no correlation with getting it again if you've had it the first time.
Oh, okay.
So
That's good.
everyone is saying to be optimistic. They put me on a couple of different and additional drugs. And I'm just hoping for the best because that's really all there is to do.
Yeah. That's true. That's what I say all the time. Well,
Right.
that's fantastic. I'm glad you're doing so well. And I'm going to ask you my last question. And
Yeah.
the last question is, if you had a piece of advice to give to somebody who was pre-transplant that you wish that you had before your transplant, what would that be?
Um, so I listened to lots of your other podcasts and I've heard this question being asked before,
Yeah.
and I've agreed with all of the advice so far that I've heard. Um, and this is probably repetitive, but I guess I have two things. Um, don't give up on yourself and don't let anyone give up on you, because that's really kind of what happened with me. And I never thought to question a doctor or a plan. And then I just decided like I'm not gonna I'm not gonna agree to the plan to just sit here and be miserable and be worried. I'm gonna just find another plan and
Yeah.
someone else that would believe in me. So you really have to be your own advocate in these crises. And it's so difficult because it's at your most vulnerable moment. Hard to speak up for yourself. Um, but it could save your life.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's probably like you said, you've heard a lot of advice, and that's a very common one, is to just
Mhm.
kind of advocate for yourself. And I think
Yeah.
that's so important. So important.
Yes. And I think the other one, I don't know if I'm wording this right, but there's kind of like this unique opportunity that you get through illness about your mortality, that you have some notice and some time to really think about, you know, what if, just what if. And so if I'm not going to live to be 95 years old, like, what do I want my life to be like? And why am I not doing all the things that would make my life happy and as I planned it? So it's just not worth having relationships in your life that aren't, serving you, or people that are supportive, or activities and things that just don't make you happy. It's just none of it's just worth it. And I try when I am with the people that I love to just be like really present, because you don't know what any of your last moments are. The trip that I went on with my family when I took a break from being on the list, it was like a really emotional time because I just wondered if it was going to be my last trip and my last time with my family. And if it was, I wanted my kids to remember it being wonderful and that we were all, present and spending time together, not distracted and playing on our phones, and just to like really be there. And I just feel like you can't help but be just hit with that kind of perspective. And it is a gift actually to have that.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's fantastic advice. And you said something, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but it made me think of myself when you were talking about relationships where you shouldn't be in relationships where people aren't supporting you, or I can't remember exactly how you worded it, but
Yeah.
I remember having a conversation with somebody and we were talking about how transplant has kind of changed them for the better. And I have changed because I have such a new appreciation for life and I'm so grateful for everything that I have now. But I also changed in a way that where like it might not be the best way, but I just don't put up with a lot of the things that I
Mm-hmm.
did before transplant because I feel
Mm-hmm.
like I don't have time for stuff like that. So I may have changed to a place where people might think that, wow, she's really different. She doesn't put up with stuff or she talks differently about things. And I feel like I do, but it's
Mm-hmm.
because of what I appreciate in life now. And that's my
Mm-hmm.
life and my time and the time I have left and my gift that I have. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Did you feel like your friends surprised you and some relationships changed and things like that?
Um, I do feel like that, but I don't feel like it's because of them. I feel like it's because of what I have.
Mm-hmm.
It's because of me. It's because of the way that I
Mm-hmm.
think now. And I think
Mm-hmm.
differently about them and the things that they do. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that when crisis hits, people will disappoint and delight you. And it's always kind of a surprise to see like which route people go.
Yeah.
Um, but there were people that I wasn't, expecting anything from that just showed up for me in like just really touching, amazing ways. And there were other people that I kind of felt like were a lot more absent than I expected.
Yeah.
And that's hard to untangle because I also kind of realized that some people are like scared about bad news and they just don't know what to say and how to be your friend. And it doesn't mean that they're a bad person or not a good friend, even, but just not for right now.
Yeah. I agree with that for sure.
Especially being young like we are. It's like not what you expect to be like chatting about with your friends.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story and sharing your wisdom with your advice. And I'm so glad that you're doing so well now. And I wish you the best. I hope that your heart lasts forever and ever. And
Thank you.
thank you so much for coming on.
I think you taking the time to make these episodes is just a really selfless, important thing that you're doing. All the episodes that I've listened to have really touched me and just got me thinking about things. And it's a small community, but it's a group of people that need each other. So it's really great that you're doing this.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that.
Welcome. Okay, terrific. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a great night, and I'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Bye bye. Thank you for listening to the Pre to Post Transplant Podcast. Please be sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Facebook. Oh, and if you have not signed up to be an organ donor, please visit www.organdonor.gov and register today. You too can save lives.